All Things Alice. This podcast will explore the cultural phenomenon of Alice in Wonderland as artistic landmark and global symbol of inspiration and imagination. I'm your host, Frank Beddor, the author of the Looking Glass Wars trilogy. Let's explore, what is it about Alice? Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today I have a special guest, Mary Pat Matheson. She's the president and CEO of the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. And we're going to be talking about the gardens exhibit, Alice's Wonderland Return. It's an Alice in Wonderland exhibit that they debuted about 4 years ago, and it's been brought back by popular demand. And I'm really excited to get into it because the Cheshire Cat is spectacular amongst a lot of other things. So, Mary Pat, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hello, this is Mary Pat.
Hello, Mary Pat. This is Frank Beddor. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Frank.
Thank you for being on the show. I'm always interested in folks that are, exploring Alice in Wonderland and all the different mediums. And when I first started writing my book and I started looking into how deep Alice runs in pop culture, I started.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is. It is really amazing. But the thing I was going to say is, when I came to gardens, Alice in Wonderland gardens, I remember pausing and going, wait, gardens? It so surprised me. It seemed like an outlier. And yet here I am talking with you about, this big exhibit that you have. New York's doing the same exhibit.
No, they're not doing the same exhibit.
Well, they're doing what they're doing. They're using Alice thematically.
They are, exactly. And the reason I bring that up, number one, is because our partners, Mosaiculture International in Canada, we don't want people to think this is the same thing, because people have gone to the New York show thinking they're going to see the large topiary pieces that we have, and they're not there. And they can be disappointed. So we just want to be clear, it's a different show.
Okay, so let's just drill down on that, because this podcast is 100% there to help talk about what you guys are doing. If we could just start with your exhibit of Alice in Wonderland, and it says return. So
Yeah.
when was the origin, the first incarnation?
That is a very good question. So this is the second iteration of it with some new work, the Singing Flowers. And I believe it was on display in 19 and into 20.
Okay.
So during the pandemic, I think I'm right about that. And we've done work with Mosaiculture out of Canada all the way going back to 2013, when we did another Imaginary World show with giant cobras, and then we did one with a big dragon. So the Alice is the newer one. And what we found when we did it in 18 and 19, or maybe 19 and 20, is that, as you well know, Alice has a cult following. And whether you're a little tiny kid or 80-year-old woman, you have a story about Alice in Wonderland. You have a special place in your heart for Alice. And so that way it just touches almost all dimensions of a life. And we discovered that. And I was out in the garden. This is a number of years ago with the first show. And I saw this woman, she looked like maybe she was 50 years old. She had a little dress on, and she was out there holding a map, and I tend to go up to guests and say, can I help you, when they look stuck? And she said, well, I think I've seen the entire show, but I'm looking at the map because I flew here from Denver to see the Alice in Wonderland show. And I don't want to leave in case I missed anything. And then she said, see, I wore my Alice dress. And she twirled around, and her dress had Alice in Wonderland all over it. It was hilarious. And she hadn't missed anything. So I walked her through the whole show. But that's sort of the way this show touches people, in a way that no other show that we've ever done has touched people.
So people like dressing up and doing cosplay with Alice. Do you encourage and invite that? Is there any kind of room? Do you have any time where people can come take photographs, or How does that work?
We decided, because the cosplay people wanted us to make it a big deal and discount it for their people, and it became bigger than what we wanted it to be. But so what instead we do is encourage, we have every Thursday night from May to the end of September, is Cocktails in Wonderland.
Mm.
So we encourage people on Thursday night to dress up.
What's
And
the
so
best?
that's really worked with the cosplay people, and even people who don't know that much about cosplay still dress their kids in Alice in Wonderland stuff.
Right.
And they become that night. So we have bars open and we have live music, and people are doing fun things in the garden, and Alice in Wonderland or Cocktails in Wonderland's been great. And we still stay open until 10 o'clock. So it's nice.
Excellent. Something for the adults after walking the kids
Yeah,
around the park all day.
exactly.
A little refreshment. Do you have a Alice in Wonderland themed drink by any
We
chance?
do have the theme drink, but Danny didn't tell me what it was. I should text Susan. I'll text somebody while we're talking.
Yeah, no problem.
We have a theme drink.
Yeah, that seems kind of mandatory of some sort.
I'm
Um,
such a wine drinker that I don't usually try these new drinks.
right, right. Hey, by the way, I saw the photograph of the singing flowers, and I'm a big fan, and I've used the singing flowers in a number of story elements with my work. So tell me about coming up with which kind of flowers you're using as in this exhibit for the singing
So
flowers.
it's really interesting. We work with a creative partner in Montreal, and I might go backwards a little bit and
No,
say
please.
the art form, which you've seen images of, is called Mosaiculture. So, which is, horticulture and mosaic together. And it wasn't invented for the millennium, but this organization was created for the millennium. So mosaic culture, some of the older instances in the 1800s manor houses of Europe would be a clock on a hill, all planted with plants, right?
Cool.
Yeah, that's kind of like where this concept of mosaic and plants came together. And so this group, the city of Montreal in the late 1990s, wanted to do something really special that was very green for the millennium, for the year 2000. And they came up with the idea of creating a nonprofit. Oh, I got the name of the drink. It's the Queen's Gambit Spiced Apple Margarita.
Oh, that sounds lovely and
Well, I
delicious.
might have to try that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they ended up, Lise Comier is the head of Mosaic Culture, and she became the head of this new nonprofit, which was a nonprofit that worked with the province and the city of Montreal to create a major competition, international competition for the city of Montreal, where cities around the world, a lot in Asia, would pick symbols of their cities or the heritage or stories or mythology from their countries and create big, beautiful images out of this topiary work. And most of them were made in Montreal, but the concepts were created in that case from different parts of the world. And it was a big competition. The show was up for the summer of 2000. I think they had 3 million guests. It was huge. And that was the beginning of this group. And now they do shows in Canada probably every couple of years. And when they were ready to do something in the United States, I had already told them that I wanted to be the first garden to showcase their work. So long story about how our relationship came to be. But Lise Comier, the head of Mosaiculture International, is the creative, I would say, inspirational person behind it all. And she has a phenomenal team, but she is the artist in her mind who takes like the Alice story and turns it into literally these figures. So when we told her that we wanted to do Alice in Wonderland, Lise dove into the movie, she dove into the book, she studied, and she came up with the flowers, which flowers, and even what music based on what she got out of the book. And I talked to her 3 days ago, and we are going to do the show again next year because it is so popular. And the singing flowers have some reference in the book to an understory of blue flowers.
Mm-hmm.
So she's encouraging us to look at a blue tapestry under the singing flowers next year. So that's kind of detail that Lise gets into. She's just so talented. And then we turn her concepts and the frames over to our horticulturists. And she is horticulturists who give us the plant lists. Now, what will grow in Montreal versus Atlanta is very different.
Of course, I was wondering about that.
Yeah, so we evaluate the plants often beforehand, so we know what will work here. And our horticulturists have done this enough now, they know what varieties of what plants will do better here than they will in Montreal and vice versa. So we pick plants that will be as close to what they recommend so that the pieces look the way they're sketched out when we work with them to design the show.
Well, I really encourage listeners to check out the website and take a look at some of the photographs because the books themselves, these oversized books, are so gorgeous. That's not even talking about, the Cheshire Cat. I think that's one of my favorites. Certainly the chessboard and the card soldiers is another spectacular exhibit. But tell me how a visitor would experience the Alice in Wonderland story walking through the exhibit. What story elements are you emphasizing when you come to see the garden?
We have interpretive signs that talk about some of the pieces, and a lot of people want to know what the plants are. But then we have a cell tour, so you can hear from horticulturists talk about the piece, or I've spoken on one of them. But we do a very light interpretation because we don't feel like it's our job to interpret the book because everyone has different perspectives on it and what it means and what it meant to you as a child. But rather, and also remember the Disney movie is a big part of this as well. So we try not to do a heavy interpretation on that. We want you to bring your imagination. And often people go home and reread the book after they've seen the show.
Wow, that's pretty inspiring. I mean, I bet a lot of English teachers are happy with you.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yep.
wait. Tell me. So you have the original text, obviously, but you brought up the Disney movie. Are you talking about the Tim Burton version, or are you talking about the animated? And what parts of those, either or, are in the exhibit that separate themselves from the original text?
I don't think any of those are, the book is really the inspiration for most of the show.
Okay.
Because Lise is just dives into the book, but we all have been touched by those two movies,
Yes,
right?
right.
So everyone's seen them, and the good news is a lot of guests are still reading the book to their children, that the book has, it's timeless, and that's really great. And not everything in this world we live in anymore, especially with books, is timeless. But I think when we talk about why this is so special to people, I think it's both, it's a trio. It's the two movies you mentioned, Tim Burton and Disney, as well as the book itself. And
What?
then just all the iterations of it. Even in our gift shop, we've got a really creative visitor center manager, and he and his team have done this really beautiful fan of playing cards over the Alice in Wonderland table, and then it's just filled with all the stuff you want to take home, like the Red Queen and the White Rabbit, and of course the Cheshire Cat, and there's so much you can buy that's Alice driven too. So it's a real opportunity for retail, but I just think it's the trio that really has made this so inspiring to other people, but it's the book that inspired the creation of the show.
What do you think is the reason that Alice keeps reemerging as an important cultural touchstone for people after all of these years? What are the ingredients that make this story last? What do you think?
That's a really hard question. I think that there is a part that the book touched us as children, without a doubt. And the book is pretty idiosyncratic. I mean, it's not
Extremely.
really clear what it's always about, right?
Extremely. A lot of interpretation. I mean,
A lot of interpretation,
you can think
right?
of it as a whimsical story or you can think of it as a scary horror story if you're
Really
growing and
dark into the
shrinking.
rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you can't come out. So I think it's like how we're terrified and infatuated with snakes
Hmm.
because they're interesting, but they are scary. Alice is not a snake, but Alice is interesting because it is beautiful and mystical and charming. Who doesn't want to shrink and meet the white rabbit, right? Do you ever get out and do you ever return to your life? And then there's that whole layer of, was Alice really about drugs, right?
Right. That was came out of the 60s and 70s for sure.
Absolutely. And I have no doubt that some people come here because they're interested in that, and they might even come on LSD. I don't know.
Are you telling me that are there mushrooms, magic mushrooms in this garden that people are
Well, they are
picking?
plant-based, remember that.
Yeah, exactly.
No, don't come here. All your listeners should not come here looking for mushrooms. But I have no doubt people to eat a few before they arrive. I wouldn't be surprised. It's just, that because that really, that part of it then comes back when you're in your 20s or 30s. So it's a generational thing, right? When you're a child, it's all beautiful imagery and you don't understand it, but you're enthralled. And then when you're later thinking about it, you're not really sure what the meaning is. So I think it's got a lot of depth to it, and that's part of the interest.
It always surprises me how much Alice is in culture and people forget when they say something like, "Oh, we've stepped into a looking glass," or "We're down a rabbit hole now," and you know, there's no logic and facts are not facts and things like that. And Alice keeps coming up in every conversation, and people just don't realize that this has all come from this original story
That's
from,
true.
you know, Lewis.
Wasn't it Jefferson Starship or Jefferson Airplane?
Airplane, yep.
Don't
Though,
ask Alice when she's 10 foot
yeah,
tall.
I love that. I love that song.
Too. I mean, you can't help love that song too, but I know it's really interesting how much that book, it'd be hard to figure out another one that has had that kind of an impact on us as humans.
What
Maybe
about?
Wizard of Oz.
I was going to say, have you ever thought about doing the Wizard of Oz? That seems like a possibility because, you know,
I'll tell you the dream of ours. So this is
yeah.
not a promise to your listeners, but because we have a lot of work to do, we would love to partner and do Where the Wild Things Are.
Oh,
And the reason is because the book, the Sendak book, was so important, so fanciful, so uplifting. And he cared about literacy and children, which we care a lot about. We do a lot of reading programs in the garden. Um, but also because Where the Wild Things Are would be such a good way to interpret the work that we do in plant conservation and biodiversity. We have 35 scientists working in our Center for Plant Conservation, doing work all over the southeastern United States, in the Caribbean, and worldwide to try to save magnolias in parts of the world like Asia and South America, working collaboratively with scientists all over the world. But telling that story to guests is hard because biodiversity and why we should care about plants is a hard concept for people to understand because plants are everywhere.
right.
They're not going to be everywhere. They're disappearing. And as they go, so go the insects and the birds
And the
and everything
animals, all
else
the
along with
animals.
it. So if we could do Where the Wild Things Are, you'd have another story that has multiple stories to go with it, but that one hits squarely on the mission zone. So that's our fantasy right now. We'd like to do that one day. I haven't thought about the other. I'm not sure that's quite as good for us
I think
as
that's a great that's a really strong choice, and we'll put our collective energy towards that happening because people don't realize how many plants we're losing every year, as they don't realize the number of animal species we're losing, and obviously those things go hand in hand. So the
they
work that
do. One of the things, since biodiversity is part of what we talk about and is important, but people don't understand, is if you think about, to me, this is big aha when you talk to people about it, or people who aren't science-based. when we were little and our parents would drive to Florida or California or wherever for vacation, every 3 or 4 hours we'd stop for gas and your dad would get out and clean the windshield of bugs.
Right.
When was the last time anybody had to clean bugs off a windshield? And when you think about that, then you go, oh my God, you're right. Where did the bugs go? And if the bugs are gone, what are the birds eating?
Right.
Oh, well, let's see, 9 billion birds have disappeared. Oh my gosh, right? And all those things are pollinators for plants. So there go the plants. And that's kind of the simplest way to understand that web of life, but it's important.
I think it's really important, and it's great that you're doing this for children because it's their generation that's going to suffer, and they're the young folks who need to really stand up for climate change and the difficulties we're facing. I mean, we just had a
That's
heat wave
absolutely.
here, and all these plants,
Oh,
they shriveled up so quickly, and I was like, I hadn't seen that before in a matter of a couple of days, and I just thought there's so many places on the planet where we're losing all of this diversity. So
they really are. It's
you
dangerous.
guys doing
And
amazing work.
sequoias, your sequoias are totally
Yeah,
endangered. And then
exactly.
all those little plants, like little orchids in the rainforest that we're losing. And it's a big loss. And you're right, the kids are going to have to inherit the mess we leave behind.
But the important thing is people can't take all that on, and so you need to entertain and show them the beauty, and that's why I want to encourage people to go to the exhibit, and if it's not this year, they go next year, because the fairy tale aspect of it, in the context of looking at these characters that everybody knows and seeing the plants that make up the stylistic choices, and there's so much creativity that's infused in this thing. It's kind of mind-blowing that you can do this combination of the mosaic and the plants and create so much beauty. And then when you're looking at that beauty, if you guys, someone's listening and you're talking about where these plants are disappearing and why you're, the conservation, people can hear that because they're having it's coming in. When I do school events and talk about my books, I spend so much time getting the kids on my side and do not talk about writing and the difficulties of writing until the very end, so the teachers are happy with me. But they're already on my side, so they can hear you, and that sounds like what you're doing.
That's so true. We years ago did some branding work. And as a part of that, we wanted to analyze whether we could market and lead with the environmental message and people would come. And what we learned is that people care about that message, but they don't come for that. They come for social experience with family, friends, and loved ones. But once they're here, they want to understand more. They don't want to have it drilled into their head, but they would like to learn more. And that's what we can do with the magic of this show. And then once you're here and you get into our orchid center, we have the largest orchid center in the United States. And there are orchids from, a quarter of an inch big to, 8 feet big that are just spectacular with these incredible flowers and unique mechanisms for pollination. And you can see them, and they're just as wonderful as the Mosaiculture Alice show. So we get you here for the bigger exhibit, but then the experience is much deeper than that. And I always think when we talked a minute ago about what do we do about all these challenges and biodiversity, I always like to leave people and your listeners with the idea that I know you probably don't have a lot of lawns in California, right? But we certainly do here. But people who have lawns, or if they don't have lawns, planting pollinator gardens and not spraying herbicides and pesticides. You can still have a lawn with a little bit of messy weeds in it if you mow it often, and really encourage wildlife to come back and insects to thrive. That's something anybody who rents or owns a home can do that can make a big difference in the world we live in today. So
And
I want people to think about what they can do without feeling like we're just beating our head against the wall and can't make a difference. We can in our own small way.
it's really true. I just recently, last year, married in my backyard. And so I ended up planting and I put a little water feature. And to your point, I'm kind of shocked by the number of, first of all, butterflies are showing up,
Yes,
and dragonflies are showing up, and insects are all over the place. And now the neighborhood raccoons and the skunks and the deer, suddenly and I can really feel what you're talking about. It's happening, and it happened within a very short time, 12 months.
yeah.
And but it is a lot to do with those insects, and I love the analogy about driving, because I remember driving as a kid and seeing the window filled, and I was like,
Yeah, it's
that
got
that is
growth.
really true. That does not happen very much anymore.
You might
So
see, 5 splats in
yeah,
a 5-hour drive versus, by the time your father or mother stopped the car, you could barely see through the windshield, at least in the sixties. And that's really sad. And that's an impact to everything. And now that you have your new backyard garden, do you feed the birds too?
yeah, I've been trying to feed the birds, but the damn squirrels, they're very cagey in terms of getting the food. So, but the
Yeah,
squirrels are been feeding the hawks. I've seen a
good.
couple of hawks come in, and like, wow, it is quite the world of
Very dramatic.
wonder. Yeah, it's very dramatic. So,
Yes, the girl go right up.
yeah, they do. I've seen that happen.
Me too. I'm
Was
happy that I have a little dog. I don't want my little dog to go up with the hawk, but they can have the squirrels.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, being a president and a CEO of this organization, what are kind of some of the things that you do day in and day out that excite you? And then what are kind of the challenges of running this organization?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the best things about it, number one is I love nature and I love plants. And so I get to run an organization that's driven by that. And, if I'm having a hard day or there's an issue, I can walk in the garden. And
Mm,
I did yesterday to go see the Alice show and go look at the orchids. And, you can't come back to your office feeling bad after you've done that. You just can't. And the story behind that is that the same thing is true for everybody else who's listening. If you can't walk through a botanical garden when you're having a hard day, just go for a walk in the park,
hmm.
go for a walk in the woods. Everything we know, lots of medical studies are showing how it lowers blood pressure and stress and anxiety. And we know our children are suffering from that at huge levels. So that's really a great thing. The other thing that's really wonderful right now, I've been in this field for over 40 years. And when gardens were started hundreds of years ago, some were started for wealthy manor houses in Europe, right? In fact, in the 1700s and 1800s, the really wealthy royalty in manor homes in England and other places would send orchid thieves to South America. That was where the orchid rape happened, and they stole them out of the rainforest. And if they took 1 million orchids on a ship back to England, they would be lucky if 100 survived. And so
Wow.
terrariums were finally built so they could keep them alive, shipping them back. But um, so some gardens started with wealth, some started as medicinal gardens, particularly monasteries that needed medicinal plants to help people heal. And then a lot of gardens started with university as science collections, all of which is good. And many of those are still here today. But today in the world we live, botanical gardens, public gardens exist for lots of reasons, not just a narrow few. And in 45 years ago, getting people to come, the big gardens would have lots of guests, but not all gardens got that. But because the world we're in today, with the disconnect from nature, the globalization of our populations, we have more people coming to botanic gardens than in the history of the world. And so this is our century. And, the bad news is it means the environmental issues have gotten great enough that people do want to come for other reasons. But the good news is, we're the havens for our community. And in 2020, during COVID, that was proven.
Mm.
I mean, people flocked here. We were the only cultural destination in Atlanta. The zoo was open and they had guests, but we had to limit numbers through the front door, but we were the place where people came, to preserve their sanity and feel safe. And And so I love that this is a time to run a garden when gardens are thriving and are more important than they've ever been. And, I also love to raise money and build. So we're in a $150 million capital campaign to build another 8 acres of gardens that will be connected to the ones we have now. But the real catalyst for this is that the new front door for these gardens are going to be on the Atlanta Beltline. And the Atlanta Beltline the whole Beltline will be done in 2030. It's a 22-mile connected loop around the city of Atlanta for walking and biking and scooters.
Amazing.
And it's changing the way we move through our community. And this is a car town. So to do that and we are going to be the cultural destination on the Beltline. So my comparison is it's like the Whitney on the High Line.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be the Whitney on the Beltline.
Oh, that's great.
Isn't that wonderful? And so we're going to have one garden, 2 front doors, one for people arriving with cars and one for people coming in their own volition. And that is great in terms of looking at sustainability, right? And how we get our guests here and become more sustainable. So we're very excited about that. We've raised, I think we're right at about 120 million.
Oh, so you're close.
Yeah, we're closing in. We'll break ground next year.
Wow, that's so exciting.
It's really fun. You'll have to follow up with us when we break ground.
Yes, I absolutely will. How do you go about raising that kind of money? I mean, that's a lot of money.
Well, I love to raise money, and I love America and its philanthropy. We are unique in the world in that our tax system was set up a long time ago to benefit people who wanted to support nonprofits. And as a result, we have some of the most successful nonprofits in the world. And you look at Atlanta, where there is really no public funding from very little from the city and the county and none from the state to speak of. Whereas other big cities, whether it's St. Louis, San Francisco, New York, have public money for nonprofits and cultural institutions. We don't here. But we have a vigorous, wonderful cultural community of museums and the garden and the Center for Puppetry Arts, which has the most famous puppets in the world. And all of that is because of the generosity of this community and America's culture of philanthropy. So we have big foundations, generous individuals, and very generous corporations that support the work that we're doing. So that's number one. Number two is to raise the kind of money that we're doing right now. It takes a bold vision. And everyone in this city knows how important the Atlanta Beltline is to changing this city. And, the first 2 miles that opened, I think 8 or 9 years ago, there was immediately $4 to $5 billion worth of development along it with, apartments and condos and restaurants. And then our section will be the green section because it goes through Piedmont Park and then to the garden and on through a quiet part of the city, and it connects neighborhoods. So I think you have to have a bold vision that makes sense for the community, that it's more than the nonprofit. It's about how do you make Atlanta and the people who visit here or live here a better place to be. And then you have to deliver on the promise. And those are really the key things in fundraising, at least in the cultural community. I think it's much harder in social services.
Well, this is a big vision, and it's going to take a lot of partners because you're talking about your side of it, the green side of it, but this affects all of the entire city. And then you're talking about, building apartments and restaurants and things like that. So that benefits the entire community from a transportation standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, and then from a housing point of view.
Yes.
So
there
must be a lot of moving pieces.
The Beltline, to their credit, is doing a lot of work on affordable housing to make sure that it's not all these really expensive apartments and condos. Because I think private equity owns about 40% of the real estate in Atlanta, and that's really driven up housing prices here, like every city in the United States. But the Beltline's doing a really good job, hard job, but a good job, as is the city. We have a mayor who's all about affordable housing to try and turn that around. And we're not a part of that, obviously, because that's not our focus or our mission. But we want to make sure, because, you have to pay admission to come into the garden, or you can be a member. So you could buy a dual membership for $120 and come in for free year round. But we're also going to do free programming outside the enclosed area on a courtyard garden that we're building, where we can do Tai Chi, or we can talk about pollinator gardens. We can let people take an herb garden home to their little apartments. So we want to do things that are about equity as well.
And then back to the sanctuary that are these gardens here in Los Angeles. We have Huntington Gardens.
Oh, I
And
love the Huntington.
it's amazing. It's an amazing piece of
That cactus
property.
garden is, when I first saw that as a young horticulturist, I think I cried. I was
Uh,
just so moved by it. It's
but I,
beautiful.
but I've noticed, to your point, that certainly during the pandemic, a safe place to be, to socialize, to be in nature. But I've also noticed that even on weekdays where I would expect it to be quiet, I show up and the parking lot's completely full. I'm like, what is going on? Where are all these people coming from? And, it's such a spectacular garden, but it's just a place to get away and have a walk. And I recently was reading the biography of Steve Jobs, and
No, I read that.
he talks a lot about going on walks and walks with friends or coworkers to talk through problems and to get away from it. And that's the amazing thing about going on a walk. And then if you're in nature, and if you're not in some spectacular, you're in a garden, things come into your mind that you just don't expect, because you're looking one way, you're thinking something else, animal, a plant, a cactus, and you're like, wait, where did all this come from? What? And that Huntington Gardens, the history of the Huntington Gardens and the estate that was there, you could spend the entire day just learning about that.
It's fascinating. But when I go there, I never go inside. I just
No.
am in the garden the entire time. It's so well maintained and so beautiful and so diverse. But it's interesting when you were talking about taking a walk, and I hope your listeners all know how walking out in nature can help you solve problems and de-stress. And we need to get our kids to do that more often, or just go play. But we forget that human beings are animals. Of course, we're an elevated animal and Homo sapiens with our brains and our emotions, although, more animals are too, but we are animals. And so being in nature where we are hearing animals and smelling things, and that's what we're supposed to do. That's what our bodies are craving. We've just forgotten that in our busy lives.
Well, and if you combine that with Alice in Wonderland, you're combining nature and what it was like to have a childhood imagination and having wonder, which is one of the things you were talking about earlier. And so you are bringing those two things together: the wonder of story, the wonder of character, the wonder of whimsy and fantasy. Can you tell us, just bring us back to your exhibit and highlight some of the areas that visitors really admire and talk to you about, and the feedback you're getting, so we can have our little walk through our Alice in Wonderland
I
on
love
this
it. Okay.
podcast.
So, you mentioned the books. When you walk into the garden from the visitor center, immediately there are two books, Alice in Wonderland Returns. And when we say books, they're 18 feet tall. These are huge books. And they're made out of steel with fabric and then soil, and then they're completely planted. So the letters are the only things that are metal. Everything else is a plant that makes the binding of the book and the front of the book. And that starts you off. And everyone wants their picture taken in front of that, because when you go home with your photos and show them to your family, you begin with the story, right? Which is Alice in Wonderland. Then you go into the show and you walk over where our restaurant Longleaf is, and people are walking, and somebody inevitably will look up to the left And on top of a stone wall, when you're walking around a curve, is the Cheshire Cat. He's just up there looking down on you like he should be. And somebody always finds it. And it's usually a child who finds it because they're always looking. Moms are talking, dads are talking, friends are talking. And then they all stop. Oh, the Cheshire Cat. And he has a story about the cat, and kids don't know how to say the word Cheshire. And then they all have to have their pictures of it. So guests are walking by and around people taking pictures. So there's just that experience that if you're walking in and someone discovers the cat, then you'll see it too. And then you come to a water feature, which is at the end of a grand alley of crepe myrtles. And in this water feature is Alice herself. And Alice is spinning because she's going down the rabbit hole.
Oh, you're
So
kidding. That's on a, so you're seeing her.
she
Oh,
was,
that's
yeah,
spectacular. And you have some teacups right near her as well,
and the
right?
whole thing is spinning.
Oh,
And there are two reasons for that. One is the reality of the book. You got to spin to go down the rabbit hole. And the other is, what do you think? What's more practical?
standing in one place so you can see all sides of it because there's so many.
Everybody can walk around this fountain. It's a 360-degree fountain. The reason is she's planted, and there are trees here and sunshine on the other side.
Oh, yes.
The plants to all enjoy the
Uh-huh.
sunshine and the shade.
Oh, that's so cool. That makes a lot of sense.
Otherwise, she would have one side
Yeah,
of her all plants get long and lanky in the shade,
right.
and in the
Yeah.
sun they're nice and tight and beautiful. So we had to turn her for photosynthesis.
Mm,
So it's both the science and the art, right?
that's great.
And everyone stands and looks at her because the teacups are there and she's got cards on her, and then she's falling down the rabbit hole, and it's just so funny. I saw a Chinese couple there this spring when we just put it in, and they were so excited. I wish I'd spoken their language to talk to them. And then you go over to the Red Queen, and the Red Queen is probably 20 feet tall. And, she's tall and red and pretty intimidating, as she's supposed to be. But what is she doing? She's
Croquet?
playing croquet.
Ah,
Do you remember
nice.
what the croquet
Yeah.
ball is?
Yeah, it's the flamingo. Oh no, the ball
That
is
is the
the
flamingo, and the ball is the hedgehog.
hedgehog.
And
That's very clever. That's fun.
the hoop is one of the cards.
Okay.
They have to bend to her will. So they have
Mm.
to bend over. So they create a hoop for the hedgehog. And now you're just laughing, right? Now you're absolutely delighted. You're laughing. You're seeing details you never expected to see in the show. And of course, every moment is a family op or a friends op or whoever you're with of photos. And then you go around another corner and you can hear music, or sometimes it's quiet and the music doesn't come on until you trigger it because it's triggered by movement. And that's where the singing flowers are. And, I think they're 15 feet tall. So they're like 12 of them all along a linear pathway. And now they're singing this wonderful song to you like little cherubs. And that is, you're more mystified than anything. Like, where did the music come from? And what are these things? And looking at the faces. And it's
That's
so adorable.
delightful. That is so delightful.
You got to come and see it. It's really great. And then,
I do want to.
and then you end up in the Skyline Garden, which is wonderful because you've got this view of Atlanta that's a really beautiful urban view of the city. And in the huge water feature, you're above it on a courtyard, and looking down is the White Rabbit. And I think the White Rabbit may be 25 feet tall. And he is sitting in an umbrella, and he is all white with pink nose and whiskers, and he's got his top hat on. And there's a clock on him because he's always keeping time for when she has to leave, right? And then he is just awesome. And I should note that we keep the White Rabbit for the holiday light show.
Hmm.
So he gets lit up during the holidays.
Mm.
And he is just a charming part of our holiday light show, which last year ABC News declared us the best light show in America.
Well, congratulations.
I know. We were on the light fight competition, and
Wow.
we won. It was great. We deserve to win. It's a fabulous light show.
Oh, good. Well, we have to show some photographs. We'll put them on the website.
You should, even video, because
Yeah.
we have a canopy walk in our woodland, And it's 45 feet off the ground with 120 or 140-foot deciduous tree forest. And we hang, I don't know, 1,500 light strands from nets in the trees, and they're all choreographed to music. So you're in it. It's a
That's
complete
amazing.
immersion. It's fabulous. And then next to the white rabbit on the lawn is the chess set that you talked about. And there are all the playing cards and the horses and the knights of the chess set. And there's a great photo op in front of it. And we have so many wonderful photos of families and children and friends together. And it's really, people spend a lot of time there because there's so many pieces on the chess set. And the lawn is like a checkerboard lawn, like a chess set would be. So it's a delightful show. And the scale is what's, the whimsy, the humor, the delight from the book, and then the scale. Whenever you blow scale up like that, it's so surprising to people. They love it.
Yeah, I imagine these kids coming through, they're looking up, their necks are, arching back, looking all around them at all these huge exhibits. And characters. It's pretty remarkable.
They love it.
Um,
And some of them, come so many times, they lead people around it like they know it so well.
Having this conversation with you and you just describing the exhibit was so compelling. It is very clear to me why you're the president, why you're the CEO, and why you've raised 120 of the 150, which I know you're going to. You're very, very good and articulate. And I want to get on a plane and come see that right now, based on the way that you described it and the love and creativity and care that is communicated through you in terms of the work that you're doing in this incredible exhibit. So I really appreciate the time and you sharing your passion for Alice in Wonderland and the this beautiful garden that you oversee.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And Frank, anytime you want to come, let us know. The show comes down next week. So
I know we're late to this party, but you might have it come up next year, right? So
we will definitely have it open next year. We're going to open it in early May of 2025, backed by popular demand. It is so popular that it's worth doing 2 years in a row. So come back and see it next year. We'd love to have you.
okay, so my last question for you is your husband is at home on a farm
Yes.
and
A working farm, a gentleman's farm, if
a
you
gentleman's
will.
farm. Let me just ask you a question. If you were to describe him as a character from Alice in Wonderland, who would you
What would
pick
drive him?
and why?
What would he be?
What's your husband's name?
His name is Bry, short for Bryant.
Okay. All
He
right.
likes to say Bry rhymes with sky. He can be really funny or kind of introverted when he wants, and he's very creative. Sometimes right now he works in the garden with a
Oh,
speaker
that,
tied to his waist to listen to the Braves games.
so he's a baseball
He could be a
fan. Oh,
sports guy, an art guy, and a vegetable gardener. And boy, which one would he be? I
well,
don't know.
I don't
Maybe
mean to put you on the spot, but
maybe he's the Mad Hatter,
well, he'd have to be for all being able to be such a Renaissance person. So,
Renaissance person.
well, thank you again.
This won't be old by next year. It's
Yeah,
things, a lot of the good things will still be happening.
it's never, Alice doesn't seem to get old for anybody other than
Doesn't get old. She's
she ages
amazing.
better than anybody who's ever aged. So,
Really, I think that's, other than The Wizard of Oz, like we said, I don't know what other book has
yeah.
hung in there quite like Alice. Well, I mean, since I live in the South, Gone with the Wind, but
Oh,
that's a different animal.
true, true. Well, again, thank you, Mary Pat. I really appreciate it. And we'll put this up. We'll stay in touch. And if I come to town, I'd really like to come next summer. I think I'd like to bring the kids.
Good, let us know,
I
please. We'll have
will.
you as our guests and we'll have a lunch or dinner together.
Okay.
We'd love to do that.
Thank you so much.
All right,
All
thank
right.
you.
Take care.
Enjoy your
Cheers.
day.
Bye. You too.
Bye.